Hey guys, Shikadi from Echo Chamber here to talk about some specific rulings for various cards from Opus 3. I'm a qualified judge in Australia and I ask Kageyama a lot of questions on Twitter, and we're seeing a lot of questions on Facebook already. The set hasn't even officially released yet, so hopefully this clarifies some things that people are unsure about. Some of these are quite short and they seem obvious to some people, but I've spent a lot of time answering these questions on Facebook, and certain things come up over and over again. So hopefully this should clear those up and more. First card's Garland. He has an X in the cost of his S ability. It's the first time we've seen this. That just means that you get to pay however much you want for the effect. So, and then its effect will be based on how much you paid. So in this case, if you pay 2, you'll do 8,000 damage. If you pay 3, you'll do 9,000 damage. King, his S ability is very similar to, well, it's the same as Warrior of Light Legendary's ability. The question that comes up is what happens if he's not on the field when it tries to resolve. And in that case, it uses the last known power, which is actually the power it had immediately before it left the field. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's printed power. It doesn't necessarily mean the power it had when the effect was activated. It just means that, yeah, if this is not on the field when it resolves, it uses the power it had when it left the field for that effect. Amarant we've seen quite a bit because he's in one of the Opus 3 starter decks. The thing to know here is put one forward into the break zone is part of the cost, which means that you have to use your own card. It has to be from the field as well, it can't be from your hand. And because it's part of the cost, it happens when Amarant is added to the stack. So by the time your opponent has a chance to respond to Amarant's effect, that forward is no longer in play. So they won't be able to respond by reducing its power or breaking it to interrupt its effect because it's not there anymore. Palom has an S ability, pretty interesting. You choose the 3 forwards of activation, obviously that's just like normal targets, but which one takes which damage you get to select at resolution. So if your opponent tries to buff one of those targets out of range, for example out of the 6k range, then you can just deal that 6k to a different one of the targets instead. This card, Phoenix, is choose up to 1 forward. So you can actually choose 0 forwards, and in that case you will still do 2,000 damage to all your forwards your opponent controls. If, however, you do choose a forward, and then that forward gets removed, or the target becomes illegal, you don't deal 2,000 damage to all your forwards your opponent controls. Because all the targets are illegal, that's just like Fairy, Sylph, other cards like that. Machina is really interesting. The thing to know here is that if more than 1 forwards are broken at the same time by him, then his auto ability triggers once for each forward that was broken. So if, for example, you break 2 forwards with Guardian Blade, then you get to deal 2 packets of 4,000 damage to your opponent's forwards. And then if those packets of damage break more forwards, then his auto ability will trigger again and you get to deal more packets of 4,000 damage. So this card can actually end up breaking a lot of your opponent's forwards off of 1 activation, which is really cool. This is an interesting one that I wasn't expecting a lot of questions about. This is EX, but it's when your opponent, when something attacks. Now, EX is actually ignore the trigger on the card. So in this case, it doesn't matter that it says when it attacks. That's irrelevant. If you hit it as damage, the EX ignores that trigger and basically replaces the trigger with when this card is taken as damage. So it's the same as even, you know, when this enters the field. All those kind of EXs, they're actually not triggering because entering the field is not. They're triggering because it's taken as damage and it's EX. So you can just ignore the trigger whenever an EX happens. Kuja is a really cool legendary. He's got 2 auto abilities. So these will both activate once per attack each. You can use them on different, you can choose a different forward with them, so you don't have to choose the same forward with both, but you can if you want. And the cost, so to speak, is not actually technically a cost. You opt whether to pay that or not at resolution. So while your opponent has a chance to respond, they don't know whether you intend to pay or not, and in fact you can change your mind afterwards. Once it resolves, you can then opt to pay or not. You don't have to select that at activation. Shelke, just the one thing here, it's when your opponent is dealt damage, so when they take player damage, like they move a card from their deck to the damage zone, it's not their forwards taking damage, so it will not trigger from their forwards taking damage. This is not really a ruling, it's just I wanted to point out why it's these numbers. These are prime numbers, so that's why 9 isn't there, because it's divisible by 3. Time Mage, this is a really interesting one. This is the first time we've seen an effect like this in FFTCG. It's called Flickering Magic, I believe. But what it means is that the forward that gets removed and comes back is essentially a different forward. So the main use for this is to dodge targeting effects or remove debuffs. Also, you get enter abilities and leave the field abilities. Obviously, only leave the field, but it can't be sent to break zone because this is not sending it to the break zone. But yeah, if your opponent casts an Odin and you activate this to remove your forward and it comes back, it's no longer a legal target for Odin. Odin will fizzle. Yeah, it's a really cool card that I hope sees some play. White Tiger will see Qun'mi. What a mouthful. There's some confusion about whether this is an auto ability or a field ability. The reason it matters is for summon EXs. So if your opponent hits a summon EX, this is an auto ability. It will trigger, however, the EX will resolve. It can't be stacked to, so the EX will resolve before it actually goes on the stack, which means that by the time this triggers, your opponent can just not pay 3 and it won't matter, because the summon EX has already happened. They can pay 3 if they want, but it will be a waste of time. White Tiger will see Nimbus is a really weird one, because we have Zan from Opus 2 who has a similar restriction about CP. However, we know he can be brought in by things like Tama, by paying for Tama without red CP, like fire CP. This card, however, can't for some reason. There's a Twitter ruling on it. Like, I wouldn't have expected this, but I saw it on Twitter from Kageyama. You can't bring this in with like Weiss or Gis or things like that, because you're not playing it correctly. It has to be played with ICP. Interesting, but yeah, it's just something to know. The other thing to keep in mind is this is backup CP, which is ice. It's not CP from ice backups. So you can pay this with Chaos and Cosmos because they produce ice CP, even though they're not ice element themselves. This is another one of the awesome legendaries in this set. Everything about the first effect, it happens at resolution. So by the time your opponent can't respond with the card that you select, for example. So you activate this, they have a chance to respond. Once they decide not to respond or whatever, or even if they respond, then it resolves. You look at their hand, select a card, it goes to grave. Bartz, just the one little thing here. His job Freelancer does count towards his abilities. So you only need, like, say, 2 extra jobs in play to get his first ability, and so on. This Barbariccia is just like Status Rose, Waka Status Rose, but some people don't know this. Effects which set a forward's power to a certain value, in this case 1000, they set the printed power to that value. So any buffs, debuffs that were on the forward or field abilities that are affecting its power will still remain even after you set its power to 1000. So if you target a forward and they have a Marina on the field, for example, that forward will be 2000 when this resolves. This card, Windrake, just a little thing here. If its target becomes illegal, so it gets removed from the field or something, Windrake itself will not return. That's just the usual. If all the targets are become illegal, then the effect doesn't resolve. This card, Atomos, is really interesting, and it looks kind of similar to Rowlarm, but it's actually a bit different. So you only choose a forwarded activation. Everything else is checked at resolution. So you have a highest power forward when you activate it, but then if that forward gets removed in response, or maybe its power gets reduced so it's no longer the highest power forward, then once Atomos resolves, it'll check the newest high power forward. So it'll be whichever forward has the highest power at resolution of Atomos. Kefka, he counts backups. Each element of a backup that has more than one element will count towards his ability. So if you have Shanto, for example, in play, then he has all his abilities active because Shanto has all the elements. Also, Kamari, for each element Kamari has, will count towards Kefka as a different element. Chaos and Cosmos are a bit different. They actually only count towards light or dark. They don't have different elements, they just produce different elements CP, so they'll only count towards one different backup for Kefka. Scarmiglione's Living Dead is a pretty cool S ability. Just remember that the first time it triggers, so once it's triggered and it comes back, that new copy of Scarmiglione will no longer be under Living Dead. It also obviously have the 2000 power, but if that one then dies, you would have to have activated Living Dead again for it to be revived again. It doesn't just keep reviving off of one activation of Living Dead. Zeromus kind of suffers from bad wording. The first part's similar to Phoenix, how if you don't choose anything, you still get the second part. If you do choose something and then it becomes illegal, you don't get the second part. But the second part of the effect, 99% certain that this is meant to be your opponent selects a forward they control. It doesn't specify that, but if it doesn't, if they can choose yours, then this card is terrible and does not deserve its 7 cost. So I'm 99% certain that they have to select one of their own forwards. But I have asked on Twitter, and stay tuned for that. I'll put the link below in the comments. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. Hopefully it's correct. Queen, this is just a little one. Once it's already been, like a block has been declared, making it unblockable will not prevent that block. So the block will still go through if it's already been blocked. Black Waltz 3. This is just effects like this, which check a property and apply a certain number based on that property. They only check when the card resolves. So in this case, if you activate this, it resolves. You have 3 cards in hand, their forward loses 3000 power. Later in the turn, you might draw cards, discard cards. Those cards don't then change the amount of power the forward's lost, so it'll still be 3,000 because that's how much it was when this effect resolved. 9's S ability. This does not actually affect the forwards in the field. So even a forward that comes into play after this is resolved, like from Tama for example, that will still won't be able to block because this actually changes the rules for the turn. Basically, it just means this turn no one can block. This card is very interesting. Form of removal for blue, which is something they kind of lacked before. The good thing about this card is you can activate it even if you don't have any forwards. So your opponent has one guy, you have no guys, you can play this. They are forced to put that one guy into the grave, and you basically don't have to deal with the drawback. So that's really cool. I'm sure we'll see a lot of play for that card. Eiko, just the thing here, it's choose exactly 4 summons. So you can only activate it if you have at least 4 summons. It means the setup's a little bit harder, but it's pretty interesting. Garnet, effects like this, the ability, cast 1 summon, cost 3 or less, they check the printed cost. So if you have an ability that's reducing costs of summons, for example, like Una, that doesn't mean that you can play those reduced cost summons as part of this effect. So if you have a 4 cost summon, it's you have Una on the field, you can't play that with Garnet, even though Una would reduce it to 3. That's only reducing it for when you play it. It doesn't actually reduce its cost, which is checked for cards like this. Cagnazzo is a text error, translation error. If you notice, the second part of the effect does not state until end of turn. It looks like it's actually a permanent debuff, but they don't exist in Final Fantasy trading card game. This is till end of turn, and you can see in the Japanese text that is literally just a text error. Theodore, this is another case of obviously you have to choose a forward when you activate it, but which effect you select, you get to select at resolution. So when your opponent has a chance to respond to the effect, they don't know which effect you're going to select, whether you give it 1,000 power first strike or brave. And you can obviously decide on that based on what happens in response to the effect. You don't have to decide as you activate it. Same Go-Go. It's a funny looking guy. The main thing people get confused about with this card is it says your opponent doesn't control forwards, plural. That actually just means 1 or more. It doesn't mean 2 or more because that's plural. They can have 1 forward, and Family Member Go-Go will not be sent to the break zone. This is really cool legendary summon. This is the first time we've been able to take more than 1 damage at once. In this case, you flip the damage 1 at a time and resolve the EXs as they come. You don't flip all the damage at once and then resolve all the EXs at once. Feral Chaos, really interesting dark card. The second effect, make sure you know that this is not like Deleter. It's actually quite different to Deleter. The main thing is Deleter chooses at activation, and so you can cheat it with things like Devout and break the card by other means. This one selects at resolution, so if you intend to remove a certain card and then that card gets removed before this resolves, then you can no longer select that card because it's not there. So it's much harder to get around this drawback than it is for Deleter. Just make sure you keep that in mind. This is another thing with Feral Chaos, but also for these other 2 cards, Genesis Avatar and Angel Penance. When they say the card name is treated as that name, that's literally just they have that card name. It doesn't give them any of the effects or anything like that of those cards. So it just means, say, Feral Chaos. Later on, if there's a Chaos card that has an S ability, you can discard the Feral Chaos for that, or obviously you can't have Chaos and Feral Chaos in play at the same time. Oh, and this is just another quick rule about effects that kind of say do damage and additional damage. They actually deal all of that damage as 1 packet. So stuff like Ace and Diablos, it says 1,000 for each or 4,000 for each. It doesn't deal like 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. It just deals, say, 3,000 or 8,000 at once. It's relevant for effects that like reduce damage or increase the amount of damage taken and things like that. Just so you know, it's 1 packet of damage for those kind of effects. Yeah, that's all for now though. Thanks for watching. If you have any more questions, you can join the Echo Chamber Facebook group. I've got a link below. You can ask there. I'll answer it whenever I'm online. Shout out to Mognet for the images, Josephia for video editing advice, and most of all to Kageyama for being so active on Twitter. He's always being bombarded with questions. He's always endeavoring to answer them all like within days. It's awesome. This is probably the first time I've seen like authority figure in a game be so active and trying to help the community, which is really good. It helps a lot, so I encourage you to ask him, check out his Twitter and ask him any questions that you have. Really good. Thanks for watching everyone. Cheers.